Were you guys all at the first seminar I did talking about the difference between the SPAR and okay, good. So as I always say every time I meet you guys, the expectation, we're trying to push a 2-year MSN program as much as possible. So once you've got done 9 credits or 2 semesters, you should be thinking about your SPAR thesis. And you should be moving on from your provisional advisor to identifying somebody you're going to work with. So that means you should have an idea about what the problem is you want to approach, even though you don't have the actual research question or specific topic. But find a supervisor who can work with you and help you develop that. In the meantime, you work with your provisional advisors to get a little bit more focus. So, but you should be moving on. And sometimes there aren't really courses that people want to take during the summer. You can start on your proposals before all your coursework is done, which people used to think they had to do all of their coursework. But there's a lot of literature review you're going to do anyway, so you can start on it. So we'll talk more about SPAR projects because they're a little bit more confusing, so we'll talk about those today. Talk about selecting the topic and the supervisor, what your committee structure looks like, and more on and what proposal writing looks like. So I love working with students on their scholarly project or their thesis. I think it's the most fun thing I do, really. And I see students have all kinds of different experiences. Like students will say, this is the most fabulous experience. For other students, it's like, oh, it was so much work and it was so hard to get focused. But what you just need to get started, like it really requires self-discipline, and don't put it off. There's people put it off till they finish all their coursework, and then they don't get to it right away. And as more time goes by before you start your proposal or start working on your SPAR thesis, it gets harder and harder. And people actually tend to not do as well the longer it gets dragged out, because then you start forgetting your coursework. Forget all your 552 coursework when you're trying to write your proposal. It's really hard to go back to, so just jump into it and start doing it. So that's what most people say. They just should start it earlier, and you just have to be disciplined about keeping at it. So I want to make a couple announcements, and one is that in the past, the SPAR projects used to be kept in this student services office, so they were just kept, and if anybody wanted to see them, they had to request that through student services. They now go into the UBC library. So that's kind of up the ante on the quality that you want to have, because it always has been a public document. It was just harder for people to get hold of. But now it's going to be in that database, so anybody from Texas to Iran to India can actually have a look at your product, whether it's a thesis or a SPAR.
Is that circle?
Yeah, that's circle. Yeah. So that's kind of new. And so that also goes along with a change in the SPAR, in that now we're not permitting any primary data collection, because anything that would require ethics approval, and but it's a small project. There's a real danger that what it could look like is a poorly written thesis that people won't understand, like it's something with data collection, ethics approval, and so we're saying nothing that requires ethics approval. And because it's going into, like, people used to want to do quality assurance projects, but those often can't become public documents because it belongs to the agency. And really, if it is a work you're responsible for at work, it's not your school work at the same time. It could be related, like you could do a SPAR project that's related to something, a quality assurance project that's going on at work. And it might be the literature background for it, but it won't be that QA project, because that's really, that product belongs to the institution. And so it shouldn't be made into a public document. Hi there, come on in.
Thank you.
Irma, right?
Yeah.
And
Jaleesa.
Jaleesa.
Sunny day.
It is so gorgeous today, yeah. So I just made two announcements or one announcement so far, but that's important. And I was saying that the SPAR projects now go into Circle, so they're a public document. Hi!
I'm
Come on
very,
in.
very sorry.
I was just talking about so we're just starting. I was just making a couple announcements saying that the SPAR projects will go into Circle now, which they haven't, and that SPAR will not incorporate any primary data collection. So, and we was talking about how QA or QI projects really belong to the institution, so it's not appropriate to put it in Circle. The other change that's happening is if you're doing a thesis, we're going to be working on implementing a public defense for the thesis. This has always been, yes, this is a really good thing. But they're already terrified when I told them that people can read their SPARs, you know, whether they're in Thailand, India, South Africa, it's all public now. So you probably heard that at the doctoral level, the culmination is a final oral exam and defense of one's dissertation. But what we've realized is UBC School of Nursing is about the only school of nursing across Canada that has not required a public defense of their thesis, and about one of the few departments in UBC that doesn't. So we're really just getting on board with the standard across Canada and the UBC. But we're kind of excited because it means now you get to show off your work when you're finished. And there's a real recognition of having finished something that's a major piece of work and something that, you know, contributes to the knowledge in your field. So we're actually looking forward to that. So probably by that, I'm sure it'll be implemented by the time you get around to doing your So everybody here started this September. Yeah, so I was saying they should be thinking about moving on from their provisional advisors to taking a supervisor, but their provisional advisors can help get that started. So that's what we want to talk about. So in topic and supervisor, then we'll talk more about committee structure and proposal writing.
Sorry, just because we're kind of on the topic of the whole defense now of the thesis. Can you elaborate, like just in a tiny little snippet, what that implies?
What the defense would look like?
Yeah.
So it would be an oral presentation, probably about, you probably have 10 or 20 minutes to describe what your describe your thesis, and so your committee would be there. We haven't worked out the details exactly and whether or not there'd be any kind of external reviewer or not, or whether it would just be your committee, and then other faculty and other students would be invited, and we would probably hold them, like have a whole day session. So it'd be like research rounds, so you can come and listen to other people's thesis defenses.
And is that incorporated into like the evaluation of
The final, there'll be a small portion of the final, if we continue grading, a small portion of that would be your ability to explain your work. Yeah, but it would be a small part of it. The written document is still the most important. But we're not trying to make it onerous. We are trying to make it more of a celebration of finishing it. And but it also does give you a chance to show a different skill set, because some people can explain things very well, and that might come more easily than the writing. So hopefully by the time you finish, you really do finish with that sense of you have some specialized knowledge and you've developed some specialized skills that you can use in whatever workplace setting you go into.
So just to clarify, that's only for thesis, no SPAR.
No, just in case. Yeah. SPAR goes into Circle, but the thesis would be the Circle.
I'll leave with it.
What do you think?
I think it's great. I did a public defense of my thesis almost 20 years ago, and it is super fun. Because you have done so much work, and then you get to share it publicly, and you get to talk to people about your work, and you know the most about that topic of anybody at that moment in time, because you have worked so hard on it, and it is just a really great experience. And the one thing you always have to feel confident about is your supervisor and your committee will never put you in that position unless you're ready. That's what we always tell doctoral students. You never go forward for an oral exam unless your committee feels you're ready. So the thesis would be exactly the same. You would have opportunities to practice your presentation. You would, your committee gets you ready. That's part of what our role is. So it is just.
Yes, you would most likely develop a short PowerPoint presentation to help you speak to it. Yeah.
And then you can reuse that PowerPoint presentation when you present at conferences or at the Graduate Nursing Student Association Research Day and Ethel Johns and all these things that you can do. Because you have to remember that you are generating new knowledge for the discipline of nursing, and part of our commitment when we do that and have participants in our research is that we're going to share it. So I feel quite passionate about that aspect of it, I suppose.
Yeah, we are. We're
I have to say, whenever I'm giving a talk and somebody comes up and helpfully says to me, "Are you nervous?" which is like the least helpful thing I can say to you right before I say, "No, I'm excited." And I just reframe those emotions and the bubbles inside me. So everybody's being there. It's all okay.
Yeah.
It's good.
Your supervisor can be in the back of the room smiling and nodding.
Yeah, that's what you will see.
And if she isn't, or he, look at somebody else. Never look at anybody that's frowning or is on their cell phone. Okay, good. Has anybody already selected their supervisor?
I'm going with Sabrina.
What's your topic?
Looking at St. Paul's, they use an electronic handover tool for physicians. I'm just looking at the kind of pre and post
Yeah.
implementation. So it'll be an interrupted time series analysis, which I'm going to take Mike Law has a course, a 6-week course that I'm going to try and take because I don't really know anything about it.
So you're very early on to get a project going. How did this happen? What can the other people learn from you?
Well, I had just been discussing kind of handover, and that was a topic that I am interested in, and I had kind of developed a tool to use in our immersion department, and I had said something about it in class, and then Sabrina approached me saying that that there was a project that if I was interested in, that could be an opportunity. So I talked to her and the physician that developed the tool, and Leanne Curry, and then thought it was something that would be interesting, and maybe the findings could then be applied to nursing, or could develop an electronic tool for nursing.
Yeah.
Cool.
Then that would do, yeah. You want to talk about topics and selecting supervisor?
Sure. I know some of you are going through the speed dating process, and some of us are hard to get a hold of, but the tests just continue because we're coming to the end of a very busy term and summer's approaching, so it's a great time to connect with people to just say, this is what I'm thinking, and oftentimes, I find when I meet with students, it will be, some people are very clear what they're going to do and already have a very refined idea, which is fantastic. Other people can be very broad sort of in what they're thinking, and talking to potential supervisors where people can then say, okay, well, I could see that this would be a piece that maybe, we could connect on. So those conversations are really important if you're feeling like, I have no idea because I just feel like this is so big. And other times, sometimes supervisors will have pieces of their own research you can work on that you might connect into. And then I also want to say it is totally okay if you're like, I'm going the SPAR route and this is sort of what I'm thinking. And then talking to supervisors even about like, how does this fit with the description of a SPAR? Because sometimes it can feel like, I think when you read that description, a little unclear, like what does this look like? And it can be a little bit different. So I think having those conversations and saying like, what is the piece of this that is knowledge development that I can kind of root myself in? So I think those kinds of conversations are really, I think, hopefully helpful and enjoyable, and I think we are used to students approaching us, so don't feel like it's, a monogamous relationship kind of like, I've come to meet with you, therefore we're connected. It can be a series of conversations. And one of the things I think, too, that's really important when you're meeting with people, it's not just like the content area, but to say, what is your style of supervision? And you as a learner need to know what kind of supervision you're looking for. Because different people want different things or need different things to support their learning. And as a supervisor, we need to be able to articulate what our style is. And I think that's an important piece.
I have a lot of students will come to me, either people that I'm the provisional advisor for, or coming to me as MSN coordinator, and who are feeling very vague about where they want to go or what they want to do. And I think it does take it often takes a lot of conversation deciding what piece of the topic and whether you go the SPAR route or the thesis route. And so we don't expect you to have necessarily come with a really clear idea, and that conversation about what's more appropriate. And sometimes people come in and say they want to do a thesis, but when we really talk about it, during the SPAR and a couple of extra courses, it fits in with where they want to go. And so that's what you need to think about. Where are you going in your career trajectory? What skills do you want? What knowledge do you want? And I was talking to somebody yesterday who they were talking about a new position being developed. And I was suggesting, well, maybe what you want to do is a type of a systematic literature review, a rapid evidence assessment or something like that, so that you will have a good handle on where the research is at in order to be able to fulfill this new position that's just been created, because you're going to already have pulled the literature together. So thinking about, what you want to do with your particular topic. And when I say literature review, like there's a scoping review it's done in a systematic process, but it's smaller and more appropriate for a SPAR. But if you're going to do something like a rapid evidence assessment, which is getting to be more like a systematic review where you really evaluate the quality of the literature, then that's more appropriate for a thesis. But can really put you on top of the literature in a particular area. What are some of the SPAR topics you supervise?
That's a great question. So I'll just kind of list off a few. One of the students I worked with was looking at developing a family-centered care model for ACE units. So she looked at the literature around family-centered care, which is mostly based in pediatrics, and looked at what would this look like in an acute care for elders unit. So she was really generating sort of an idea around a theoretical model that later could be done in an actual study or implemented in practice. I had another student who was really interested oftentimes it's people who work in education, and she was interested in developing a toolkit for clinical educators and clinical instructors to support nursing students' mental health. So looking in the literature about so part of it was like just the literature review piece, but then it was also a piece around here are ideas, like practical ideas about what you can use in your education practice. Another student looked at, she was really, this was year 2, and it was really interesting to me. She reviewed the literature around patient feedback in nursing student education, which I thought was very interesting. So can you imagine you're a nursing student, you're on the unit, and those people that you provide care for actually are part of your evaluation and will give you feedback, sit down with you, they're probably in bed sometimes, and give you feedback on your studentness with them. So really interesting projects, I think, that add to knowledge. And then as Susan said, people who've done more like scoping reviews, So sometimes that's being done in relation to their workplace. So I worked with one student last summer who was doing a project, and it related to the redevelopment of BC Women's Hospital and part of his role there. And then I had a student who just recently finished around working with families of patients with dementia in acute care. So lots of different ways that the project can kind of come to life, I think, to fit with what people are interested in doing.
Yeah, and if you want to make it very relevant to your workplace, that idea of taking a model or other recommendations and see how would it work within your setting. So it's not a QA project, but it's really doing an analysis of the situational factors. So I remember one student was looking at, again, family-centered care, but applying it within the Saudi context. So a real analysis then of how healthcare services are delivered, kind of some of the cultural issues, and what would this look like if it was implemented. So I think that's quite common in a way of making it very relevant to practice and to your particular workplace. Looking at the literature on a couple of different interventions and comparing them, what's known about them in terms of their effectiveness and their acceptability to the care providers.
Also, I find that I'm having trouble deciding where to go, in addition to the fact that I'm not sure what the courses are exactly that are going to be offered in the time frame that I would like to complete the two-year program. So I was wondering if you guys know of any, like, if you have any knowledge about what courses are for sure going to be offered in the next.
So we're approaching the course offerings in a more structured manner now, so that the core courses you're required to have the 504, 511, 552, what else am I missing? 502. So there, we offer them sufficiently so that everybody, if you're going through on 2 courses a term, you can finish those. And then in September, we offer both the nursing 548 and 549. So that's the qualitative methods and the statistics course. So if you're doing a thesis, that allows you at the beginning of your second year to finish off that required course, because you need to have one of those courses, unless you're going to do a completely different methods course like narrative inquiry or something, and then we send you off to another department to take a course on narrative inquiry. But that will allow you to have those skills developed. So that's why I'm saying you can start your proposal this summer thinking about it, starting your literature review, and then by the time December rolls around and you've finished your methods course, that should really help you finesse your thesis proposal. Okay. So we planned it that way so that you could graduate by, a year from now. Right. That it would be pushing it, but we've had students do a thesis and graduate in 16 months. But somewhere in that 2 to 2.5 years, that would really be timely. So the courses are being offered to support that. There's also, you could take courses through the Western Dean's Agreement, again, if there was a specialized methods course you wanted to take or some standard course, you might be able to do that. But those basic courses you need for a thesis will be offered.
Susan. Natalie had a question.
Natalie have a question?
What does a thesis process look like from literature review to proposal and moving forward to thesis completion in terms of specific activities and timeline?
What does a thesis process look like from literature review to completion?
Literature review to proposal and moving forward to thesis completion in terms of specific activities and timeline.
Literature review. That's the hardest part. Your supervisors will all approach it differently, and whether we're talking SPAR or a thesis. Usually, when I work with students, I tell them I'd like to see a 2-page proposal to start with, just to start getting ideas down so that we have something concrete to talk about. What the actual proposal looks like will vary between faculty, and it will also vary, so obviously it varies with a SPAR, that's more likely to be something like a 6 to 8 page proposal. But for a thesis proposal, usually the students I work with are doing quantitative proposals, And so I want to see more of a traditional thesis proposal where there's an introductory chapter, enough of a literature review that I'm confident the student knows the state of the literature and where the gaps are, and then the methods piece. And the methods piece will be the most detailed to write for a quantitative thesis. And a lot of that, it's very iterative. Those of you who've been taking 552 now, you start with your research question, you think about your sample, how do you collect data, you decide, well, that's not really feasible, I better go back and change my research question a little, or change my sample, and it is very iterative. But with a quantitative thesis, you need to have the details worked out so that we can be assured that it's going to be sufficiently rigorous and feasible. And now, I'll ask Jennifer to talk about the qualitative proposals, which often tend to be quite different.
I think, yes, I think they can, so depending on the methodology that you're using, and your supervisor, things can differ. I think my approach is very similar to Susan's in that the first chapter is about 6 to 8 pages of like what is it that you're studying. Then there is a very comprehensive literature review to show the current state of knowledge on the topic. And then there is the methods chapter where you do need to have a good grasp of the methodology that you're using. So if you take the qualitative course, is it phenomenology, is it interpretive description, is it ethnography? I think for myself, I really expect people, if you're going to do a thesis, that you have done something beyond the core courses. So if you're doing a qualitative thesis, if I'm going to be your supervisor, I will expect you to have completed a qualitative research course. Because it's no small undertaking, I think, to do an original study. And so it is, I think, a really hard piece because you really can't embark on the fun part of collecting data and, and doing those pieces until you've really worked out what it is that you're doing. So I think it is a very iterative process. It is something that it's a 9-credit thing for a thesis. It's 3 credits still for the SPAR. That is the level of work that is expected. So I find that sometimes because it isn't sitting in classroom time, people don't anticipate the amount of time that it is going to take. And it is like a regular course and you have to reserve that time. So I always say to people, people come to me and they say, what's the timeline? I'm like, that's up to you. You can tell my style of supervision. Because if you put time in your calendar and you block off time and you work on this, yes, it can be done pretty efficiently, but it's that very self-directed process, and so it is so easy that it comes to the very last piece and life takes over, right? So I think my thing around that question is, you need to have good insight into your own self-discipline as a learner. And that's entirely up to you. And that's what can make this the challenging part of the degree. Because you're no longer expected to show up every week, 3 times a week, or 1 time a week, or be online. You set the schedule to a certain extent.
I was just going to ask about the proposal. So is it the proposal the same as your chapter 1, 2, and 3, or is it a condensed version of your chapter 1, 2, and 3?
I think for the thesis, it's your chapter 1, 2, and 3 written in the future tense. And then
you change the tense.
And then you change it to the tense.
And that's what I like to see, but I know there's supervisors who don't require that. You will have to do the same amount of work eventually because the detail needs to be in there. Sometimes I'm a little bit more lenient on fine-tuning the literature review so people can get going on doing their data collection. But the literature review isn't in a form where that it would be appropriate to going into Circle. You're going to need to tighten it up have more synthesis. But as long as I'm convinced you know the literature, you've identified where there is a gap in the literature, and you've learned something about methods, because when you're doing, part of doing the literature review often is learning what has worked for other people, what are the weaknesses or the limitations in their methods that you're trying to overcome. So that's the other part. It's about the substantive issue and about the methods. But I think for doing a quantitative thesis, if you have to decide on data collection instruments, you're looking at 3 months to do a research proposal. And then there's a piece of a theoretical foundation. Now, some people will actually almost start with a theory and then test that theory with a particular question, with a particular population. At other times, it's more of a theoretical perspective of the approach you're bringing, some of the concepts you're interested in. So that idea of your theoretical foundation can be very precise in how it drives your research, or it can be broader.
And I think that with a SPAR, it's the proposal is not like the first 3 chapters, because a SPAR has a different length and sometimes a different purpose, and that's where that iterative piece can become quite a bit more. So typically when I'm working with a student around a SPAR, that first kind of chapter, like that laying out of the landscape of the issue, getting to what is the purpose of this SPAR, and these are the steps I'm going to undertake, is sort of that first 6 to 8 pages. That's when I will take it. So as your supervisor, usually you'll work with your supervisor on this, access committee members around their expertise, but typically your supervisor wants that piece to be pretty well founded before the committee members have to play a role. And part of this is just around sort of workload as well. Like those committee members, they have students they're supervising. So your supervisor will expect a certain preparation before it goes to them, and then they also have a fresh view of it, which is really important. So the SPAR, usually for me, it's more like that first chapter kind of piece, to be able to go to the committee member and say, this is what the student is planning to do. Does it make sense? Do you think we've missed anything before we go into the next step? Whereas with the thesis, it would be the first 3 chapters. Then that goes to the committee, because they're really good at seeing where there might be potential gaps, because they are going to be experts in your substantive and or methodological area. And then there's usually some refinement of the proposal at that point, and then once you get the committee approval, then you move forward to doing the research more.
I'm going to back up for a second. If I'm functioning as a provisional advisor to somebody who's just getting started, I said I encourage people to write a 2-page mini proposal, and students can use that to go around to interview different potential supervisors. It helps them get their thoughts down more clearly in their own.
I'm going to start doing that. I like that idea.
Yeah.
Because it helps you to formulate your ideas, and it also helps that you're not sitting there looking at someone like,
Yeah.
Like, you asked to meet with me, like,
Yeah.
hey, bring me something.
Yeah. So have your provisional advisor work with you on that.
Yeah. Because then they can also give you advice about who might be good for you to go and meet with, in terms of what the content area you're interested in and the methods that you're going to be using.
So then if you've got those 3 chapters written, so I'll talk about the thesis, and you're going to do primary data collection, you need to go through an ethics approval process. So then that will be after you have your proposal developed, before you do any data collection. If you're doing secondary data analysis, so if you're working off of a piece of your supervisor's research, you may or may not need separate ethics approval. And your supervisor will help you with that. Most of you have, if you've gone through 552, did you do the Tri-Council Ethics Certificate? Yeah, that's really good. Okay. And supervisory committee, so on the thesis you need 2 other members besides your supervisor. on your SPAR, you need one other member. Now, and we're trying to use our adjuncts a lot more. So CMS is in the community, some of our clinical associates in the community. So you can look beyond the professoriate and instructors here. So people who they might have a substantive knowledge that you're interested in, or it may be access to a particular population group.
And always consult with your supervisor about who should be on your committee, and never invite committee members until you have talked to your supervisor.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes we get some surprises.
Yes, we do.
Because if it's somebody that I need, in the end, I approve the committee structure, and so there are some restrictions on who can be a supervisor and who can't. So we wouldn't want to put you in an embarrassed situation where you would just say, oh, you can't be on my committee.
Yeah. So just going back to the timeline, so do you find that most students that are doing quantitative or qualitative thesis are doing their chapter 3 during the fall semester while they're in that course?
That's what I'm suggesting, is that they start it, yeah. So if you get some of your literature reviews started during the summer, if you have some extra time, then that allows you, as you're going through the course in the fall, to really work on your proposal. You know, with 552, you've got the basics of how to do a proposal. Now you need the more specific method skills in quantitative or qualitative. And then I figure it's going to take, after your proposal is done, it's probably going to take 6 to 8 months to finish your thesis. 3 months to do a SPAR if you work on it, in a focused manner.
Double underline, in a focused manner. 6 to 8 months with a focused manner.
Capital letters.
If you can keep paying the university, and they'll gladly take your money.
I asked about that. If we've finished everything and we submit it to our committee, how long does it take you guys to kind of get it back to us?
Well, you don't
So that it can
submit
be-
just once, you submit repeatedly.
Yeah, no, but I mean
yeah.
your final.
But when
final
it's final,
thing.
well, by the time it's final, you should just have been doing some final editing on it.
Because yeah, I had a friend who did that.
So I will always quote the policy. We have 2 weeks to turn around materials.
Okay.
So when I have a student that might be getting close to the end, getting antsy about like when am I going to be done, then you go and you look at what date you think you're going to be done by, and you create a timeline walking back from that date, allowing for 2-week turnaround every iteration of the refinements, and then you come and you say, okay, this is what I'm committing to, and that can usually be quite workable because the supervisor and committee member know when they'll be away on vacation. So like I love getting emails like it's August 1st and I'd like to be done by August 31st. Well, sad to say, likely not going to happen because I had no idea this was coming, neither did the committee members, and we're all on vacation sometimes. So I think if you are looking at being done in an efficient manner, the more that you can tell your committee, you can expect my stuff on March 31st. I will put that in my calendar and I can give you feedback. But if March 31st comes and I got nothing in my inbox, and April 1st, April 2nd, April 3rd, April 4th, well, the time that I had blocked is gone. So that's what I encourage people to do, is do up a timeline.
And the idea of 2-week turnaround, that's presuming we've been getting drafts and
Absolutely.
providing feedback. You don't turn this paper in on March 31st if it's a rough draft and think you're going to get enough feedback and have time to revise.
Oh, no. And we do a lot of writing. I would say when someone sends me something, my expectation, this is just me, so I can tell you're all going to come see me. It will be like version 4 or 5. I'm never getting the first draft of anything you've written because I can tell you it's not going to be good enough. When I do proposals, there are 4 or 5 drafts before my the other people on the proposal to get to see it. There's continual refinement. So it isn't like Jennifer sits at her computer, saves it, and sends it off to you. I make sure I have time to go back and refine and refine and refine. It's just like a final paper for a class, except that you're doing it many, many, many times until you think it's going to come out your ears. So the most important thing about your SPAR and your thesis is you pick a topic you love, because by the end, you will hate it. So if you start off with something that you do not find incredibly appealing, by the end,
you may not like the process, but hopefully the more you know about something and you realize the importance.
you will love it again. And I'm not saying you'll never love it again. I'm just saying,
You'll be sick and
you'll
tired
think,
of it.
oh my gosh, you will be sick and tired of it. So pick something that you're passionate about, is what I always suggest. And trust your committee. This isn't our first rodeo. So, if we say it's not ready, it's not ready. And as a supervisor, when I get something, I'll look at it, and if it's not ready to go to your committee, but you thought it was, it will not be going to the committee.
Yes.
So you will get it back, and I will say, this isn't ready.
Yeah, you do not send things to your committee without your supervisor approval. Yeah. That doesn't mean you can't go and talk to committee members. If somebody's a methodologist specialist in something, and while you're writing your proposal or do your analysis, you can have that conversation with committee members. But anything that looks like it's come out with the supervisor's approval for distribution, better have your supervisor's approval on it.
Yes, I actually have people send it to me, and then I send it to the committee.
And that's something else, that when you have your first meeting with the committee members, they should talk about how they want to work together, because people have different ideas about what they want to be involved in, when they want to be involved.
Yeah, how often typically would you meet with your entire committee in the whole process?
Yeah, that varies too. So I always like to have a beginning meeting where we really agree on the research question and the approach. Then we decide if it's just the supervisor is going to work on something. When you're, probably as you're getting into data collection to make sure things are going right, because your committee is, they're consultants to you. And then once you have your findings, usually before you start writing the discussion chapter, can be helpful to get people's views on, here's what your findings look like. And I'm talking quantitative, where we kind of have our findings and our interpretation are a little bit separate and separate from the data collection, so it works. But kind of like those key pieces where the consulting will be helpful to you.
But you will have much more regular contact with your supervisor.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We are there for you, but to use your supervisor's time most effectively means that you do a lot of work on your own. Then we're much more fun to work with.
Oh, yeah.
See, you scared them yet?
I think adequately.
So if I could ask, what would be each of your number one kind of advice for working with a supervisor? What would it be?
Hand something in you're proud to hand in when it's that time. Early on, when I say that, the 2-page, when you're getting your ideas out, fine, come with your ideas. But once you're really working on your proposal, and I say it's okay to have questions and areas that you have gaps in, you want to get feedback, but think logically. That's my number one. Being able to create a good logical line of argument. That's really important. Does it fit together? Like if you're suggesting something for data collection that doesn't fit with your research question or with your potential participants, think critically.
Yeah, and I think I totally agree with that, and I think sort of the other side of it is know yourself as a learner. Because there are people who, as supervisors, meet with their students every week. I do not do that. So know what you need, right? because I think that really helps to move the process along is when you have that insight into what you're looking for in that experience so that you can work with the people that can best support you.
I started off saying this is the most fun part of our job.
So fun.
It is,
I love it.
Yeah.
It is. And it's such it's a huge, I think, feeling of accomplishment when you get to the end and you're like, oh my gosh, I created this. You know, in the olden days, we would have our theses or SPARs bound in a hardcover book with gold writing.
Yeah, you can come and see ours in our
You
office.
can come anytime, and every once in a while you can note that book. I can do this, I can keep going, I can make it through another day. You used to get copies made for your supervisor and all your committee members, and you can probably still get that done. So I think you know it.
You know, your name on gold on the lining.
So I think this is the part where you think this is a university experience, and that is the academic part of it. That is just so like, I did this. So it is fun for us, and I think it's just a great part of the university experience.
Yeah. Any last questions?